Welcome back to Killer Stories. I'm your host, Bobby Holmes. I'm still not 100% over my sickness. Apparently, I have strep throat, so that's been fun. I'm hoping this amoxicillin kicks some streptococcal butt so I can feel back to normal. This week, I have a story that's going to make you second-guess any upcoming camping trips you have planned. In my experience camping, everyone I met has been so nice and friendly, just fellow outdoorsmen enjoying nature. I've always felt safe, even though it's just a thin layer of nylon tent between me and wild animals, or even worse, monsters. By that, I mean people. We need to remember that not all people are friendly and kind. Some have malicious intentions. Obviously, I share a story about them every week, and I'll probably never run out of material. Today I'm covering the shootings at Malibu Creek State Park. Malibu Creek is about 25 miles outside of Los Angeles, California. It's located in a canyon between Malibu and Calabasas. The state park opened in 1976. It is, or was, a popular camping site, bringing in nearly 75 million people each year to take advantage of its beautiful coastal beaches, lighthouses, lakes, volcanic fields, and historical sites. Before it became a state park, the area was used as a movie ranch by 20th Century Fox, which means it's where they shot movies and TV shows, the most popular being the TV series MASH. Jumping ahead to 2018, 35-year-old Tristan Beaudette was no stranger to the park. He had hiked and camped there many times. Tristan and his family were about to move to the San Francisco Bay Area, so he planned one last camping trip with his two daughters. Tristan was quite the outdoorsman. He spent his free time sharing his passion with his girls, teaching them how to have fun outside, not inside watching TV and playing video games. His wife, Erica Wu, was an OBGYN. She skipped out on this trip to study for an exam. She was finishing a fellowship at the University of California, but still needed to pass her medical board certification. She helped pack up their Subaru for the weekend trip and kissed them goodbye. Erica was grateful for Tristan allowing her this quiet time to study. Tristan's brother-in-law, Scott McCurdy, and his two sons came along. All of the children were relatively young. Tristan and Erica's girls were just 2 and 4 years old, and the boys were 3 and 5. They entered the state park, checked in, and they were assigned a campsite. But Tristan wasn't happy with it. The ground was uneven. He was really picky about where he set up his tents. I can relate. Nothing is worse than sleeping on a rock. So he drove back and asked to change campsites. The final destination was site number 51. They set up 2 tents, one for Tristan and the girls, and not too far from it, Scott and the boys. After setting up, the men made a campfire and started prepping dinner. The kids wore themselves out, running through the meadow, exploring as the sun went down. After dinner, the men put the kids to bed and had a few drinks by the fire. This trip was about saying goodbye. Tristan told Scott he was very excited about the move and new opportunities. Scott was happy for Tristan. He told him how much he was going to miss him, Erica, and the girls. They hugged it out, poured water on the fire, and headed to bed. 4:44 a.m. Scott woke up to a loud noise. Still half asleep, he thought maybe it was fireworks. But then he heard the girls crying, and he snapped awake. He listened for Tristan to try to soothe them, but they just kept crying. He went over to their tent and unzipped the door. It was still very dark and hard to see, but he could hear the girls. He knew Tristan was a heavy sleeper, but geez. He reached over and shook Tristan to wake him up. No response. He grabbed Tristan's cell phone and turned on the flashlight to see that he was covered in blood, and it was pooling around the girls. Tristan had been shot in the head, a single shot that landed high on his forehead. Scott ran to the office to inform the park ranger of what happened. Rick Mullen was the first man to respond. He was the current mayor of Malibu and the captain of the Los Angeles Fire Department. Mr. Mullen pronounced Tristan Beaudet dead at the scene and called for someone to contact his wife, Erica. Who could have done this and why? Tristan was a chemist. He worked as assistant director at a pharmaceutical company. He had just put in his notice because within a week, the family had planned to move. He recently acquired a patent regarding a new form of vaccine delivery. It's possible that this was an accident or a random shooting, but the initial thought was that Big Pharma or the government placed a hit on him. But it did just seem so random, and the shot was made through the tent. How on earth were they able to land that headshot in the dark? Erica woke up the next morning feeling rested and prepared to take her exam. She was ready to walk out the door when she saw her sister standing on the porch. She was there to break the news to Erica. Her husband had been killed. She was in shock, disbelief that Tristan could actually be dead. Erica's sister drove her to Malibu Creek State Park. It was blocked off as a crime scene. She was approached by a park worker who said, quote, "This kind of stuff never happens here." But the thing is, it has happened here. More than once. This was not the first shooting in Malibu Creek State Park. Not even the second shooting, or third, fourth, fifth, or sixth. That's right, this was the 7th reported shooting in the past 20 months within Malibu Creek State Park. Something is definitely amiss. How is there 7 random shootings and nothing has made major headline news? Well, because it was all swept under the rug. The other shootings have all been near misses with the exception of one other person requiring surgery due to their injuries. Between the very first reported shooting and the death of Tristan Beaudet, the state park campground remained open. Not only were these reports essentially ignored, Malibu Creek State Park continued to push out advertisements for the campgrounds. But now a person has died. Law enforcement gets involved and starts to investigate all 7 reports. I'm going to share with you the other instances of shootings in the area that I was able to dig up. Graduate student Jimmy Rogers worked part-time at REI while he finished his degree. In November of 2016, he decided he was going to hike the Backbone Trail. It followed the spine of the Santa Monica Mountains, stretching 76 miles. Jimmy was familiar with parts of this trail, but he's never done it from start to finish. The first day of his hike ended in Malibu Creek State Park. The problem was that the campground required a reservation, which he didn't have. And even if there was space available, it was $50 a night, which is pretty pricey for a single guy just needing a night's rest before continuing his hike. Instead, Jimmy decided to backtrack near the trailhead into the park and find a spot for his hammock. He ate a peanut butter sandwich for dinner and called it a night. He wasn't too far from the Pacific Coast Highway and could hear a constant buzz of cars passing by. It was near impossible to fall asleep, so he put on his headphones and eventually dozed off. A few hours later, Jimmy heard a loud sound and felt himself hit the ground. Somehow his hammock gave way. Not only that, but his right arm was stinging. He looked down to notice multiple small wounds all over his arm. He was sleeping and had his headphones in at the time, so he wasn't sure what caused the sound. He tore off his headphones and sat in silence listening. He didn't hear a thing. He assumed he had been attacked by an animal, even though there were no animals in sight. He was spooked and ran as fast as he could out of the forest. He ran until he reached the highway and checked his phone for cell service. He called his girlfriend, who took him to the ER, where he explained he had been attacked by an animal in the woods. He was treated for rabies and sent home. A few weeks later, Jimmy noticed a change in his wound. Something started to surface. Small metal pieces were working their way out of his body. He wasn't attacked by an animal. He was shot with a shotgun. Jimmy had surgery to remove the metal pieces from his arm. He thought back to that night. He typically slept with his right arm swung up over his face. The tricep of his arm is where he was shot. Whoever did this was aiming for his head. Jimmy called the state park to leave an incident report about the shooting. The ranger basically told him that he was outside of the state park lines and there's not much they could do to help. They suggested that Jimmy call the Lost Hill station to report his incident. But no one seemed to take it seriously. The park thought Lost Hills police should deal with it, and the police thought that it was the park's problem. Nothing closed. The public wasn't alerted of this crime. Camping season continued as usual. Just a few days after Jimmy was shot, Ron Carson was staying in a camper within the campground of Malibu Creek State Park. Around 3:30 a.m., he woke up and needed to take a leak. He turned on the light, used the bathroom in the camper, went back to bed, and turned out the light. Just then, he heard a loud boom that shook his camper. He turned the light back on and noticed birdshot all over the floor. There was a hole in the wall right next to where he was laying in bed. For those unfamiliar with guns or ammunition, the ammo used in a shotgun is a shell that's filled with different sized pieces of metal. Birdshot being the smallest, it's filled with approximately 77 small metal pellets. Buckshot is slightly larger pellets. The shell holds usually around 27. Then you have a slug, one large hunk of metal placed inside the shell. Most of the shootings reported in the park found birdshot at the scene. Ron reported this incident to Malibu Creek State Park, but the park still remained open. 2 months after this incident, Mitrice Richardson and Frank Vargas are on a camping trip together. That night, they slept inside of her vehicle. The two were awakened by a loud sound in the very early morning that seemed really close. Neither Mitrice or Frank were harmed. They listened for another sound, but it was quiet, so they brushed it off and went back to sleep. Later, Mitrice noticed a hole in the back of her vehicle and a shotgun shell inside the hatch. This incident was also reported to the state park rangers and the Lost Hills Sheriff's Station. They kept the shell as evidence, but nothing ever came of it. The following summer, 2 cars traveling down the Pacific Coast Highway reported being shot at. Just across from Malibu Creek State Park was a Hindu temple. This is where both cars reported being shot. First a Porsche, and then a BMW that was driven by a teenager and her friend. She called her father to tell him the rear window had been shattered by what seemed to be a shotgun. Her father urged her to call the police. Sergeant Wright worked at the Lost Hills Station. He was also in charge of MSAR, the Malibu Search and Rescue. He claims he was only informed of the shootings in January of 2017. Lieutenant James Royal was in charge of all the detectives in Lost Hills. He and Sergeant Wright said they spoke with their captain about the situation, but the captain was about to retire. In other words, he couldn't be bothered by this nonsense talk of a shooter on the loose. Then, nearly a year went by when Ian Kincaid was driving his Tesla down the Canyon Road on his way to work in the early morning of June 18, 2018. He worked as a gaffer, which is like an electrician for movie sets. He was headed that day to work on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. As he drove past the Hindu temple, he heard a loud sound. He assumed something hit his windshield, but as he continued driving, his car alarm started to sound. He pulled alongside the road and popped the hood. He took a quick peek, but he didn't notice anything and continued his drive to the set. He told his coworkers about what happened. Someone looked over his Tesla and identified a bullet hole in the hood. After work, he went to the Lost Hills station to report the shooting. Someone took a picture of his hood, then just handed him a piece of paper indicating a crime report was filed. That was that. This shooting was just 4 days before Tristan Beaudet was murdered. A detective named J.T. Manuel said, quote, "A lot of us believed there was a pattern between 3 and 4. Definitely by 5. We knew we had a shooter out there," unquote. You think? Holy shit, 1 shooting to me seems alarming. 2 would qualify for alerting the media and closing the park, in my opinion. 5? 5 is where you think, we may have a problem here. Now, I understand the need for the state park to make money, but is that really more important than the well-being of the patrons? Is it really worth ignoring the fact that there's a serial sniper in the woods just to keep the campsites at full capacity? Yes, the majority of the shootings were misses, only damaging cars and campers, but Jimmy Rogers was hit and required surgery. It was only when Tristan Beaudet died that these shootings were finally taken seriously. After his death, the park closed. State park officials said, quote, "The safety of our park visitors is our top priority," unquote. That statement is laughable. After its closure, the park was frequently searched for any unusual activity. 4 months after the murder of Tristan Beaudet, a suspicious man was found on the park grounds. 43-year-old Anthony Rada was discovered hiking the park and carrying a 9mm rifle. The ammunition was the same type used in the shooting of Tristan Beaudet as well as the Tesla. Anthony was a felon, and there was a warrant out for his arrest. He was wanted for a string of burglaries in the area. He was hiding, living on the park grounds. They thought for sure this was their guy. He was arrested and taken into custody. He was charged with 1 count of murder, 10 counts of attempted murder, and 5 counts of second-degree commercial burglary. His bail was set for $10 million. Anthony's mental state had become questionable, postponing his trial. During his initial hearing, the judge denied him the ability to defend himself without a lawyer. He lashed out, attacking a deputy and spitting in his face. Following this incident, anytime Anthony has been presented before the judge, he was rolled in with his arms and legs tied to a chair and wearing a mesh face shield to prevent spitting or biting. I have pictures of this I'll post on my social media. He is pleading not guilty and still awaiting trial. He will face life in prison if convicted of these crimes. C.C. Woods, the editor-in-chief of the local Malibu news publication, says that the Lost Hills Sheriff Station has covered up these shootings for nearly 2 years. She believes they are corrupt and the shooter could actually be one of their own. The Lost Hills Station definitely has a bad rap. Back in 2009, an officer arrested 24-year-old Mitrice Richardson. Now, this could be an entire episode in itself, and maybe will be in the future, so I'll just touch on it briefly. Mitrice was bipolar. She was out to eat one evening and realized she didn't have money to pay her bill. She began to have uncontrolled erratic behavior. The cops were called. She was taken to the Lost Hills Sheriff's Department. Mitrice used her one phone call to call her mother. She planned to come pick up Mitrice as soon as possible, and the officer said they would keep her there until she arrived. But that didn't happen. Against her mother's wishes, they released Mitrice around midnight, with no ride home, no money, and no cell phone to try to call for help. Not to mention she was bipolar and obviously in a distressed state. Mitrice was never seen again. Her car was later found abandoned along the Pacific Coast Highway. Her body was discovered in Malibu Creek State Park 10 months later by a park ranger. There is definitely something fishy about this sheriff's station. After the death of Tristan Beaudet, Sergeant Wright and Lieutenant Royal were investigated by Internal Affairs for interfering with the Malibu Creek State Park shooting investigation. The two were doing their own separate investigating and kept their findings to themselves, purposefully hindering the case. Both Sergeant Wright and Lieutenant Royal were suspended. Sergeant Wright just straight up retired and didn't bother going back. Lieutenant Royal felt that he was being treated unfairly and took legal action. It didn't end in his favor. He was transferred to a different station and was demoted from his title of lieutenant. The Lost Hills Sheriff Station faced a $90 million lawsuit from Erica Wu because they failed to warn the public of the potential danger of a shooter on the loose. But the lawsuit was rejected. As reported by ABC News, Judge Mark Epstein said, "There were no allegations the state employees gave Beaudet the expectation of protection or had the ability to control the gunman's conduct." So basically, when you're in public, there's always the chance something terrible can randomly happen to you, which in a sense is true, but Tristan Beaudet would have never taken his 2 young daughters camping to an area where there was a known gunman on the loose. Had the public been alerted, he would still be alive today. I think Anthony Rada is the man responsible for the shootings. I also believe the Lost Hills Sheriff Station covered it up. But I think their reasoning was because they didn't want any more bad publicity after what happened with Mitrice Richardson. While I think reporter C.C. Woods has a lot of great information in her articles covering the incident, it seems like there's bad blood between her and the Lost Hills Sheriff's Department. some local Malibu drama. The idea of someone from the sheriff department being the shooter seems a little far-fetched to me. I put my money on the crazy guy. Thank you for your continued support of the show. I appreciate every one of my listeners. Please share killer stories with your true crime-loving friends. Be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts if that's the platform you use. You can go to buymeacoffee.com/killerstories to leave a donation or shop the Teespring merchandise store. The links for those sites as well as all my social media handles can be found on my link tree in the show notes. In the near future, Killer Stories will be featuring advertisements. I know it's nice to listen to a podcast without being interrupted, so I plan to just have one at the beginning and one at the end of my show. I know ads are annoying, but it's nice to actually make some money doing something I enjoy. Thanks for listening. Until next time, this has been a killer story.